Hello, this is Mr. Ferreira, and I'm going to be talking you through the different inferential statistics that there are. And this video is specifically meant to help you choose the correct inferential test. Now, what we have is 4 groups of tests. I know individually, some schools might teach each of these particular types of tests kind of separately for you to make sense of. But I've kind of categorized them into these 4 categories. Now, what I haven't done on the repeated measures one is add the sign test, but of course you could do that. So technically there's 8 tests, but these are the tests that you will need to do in year 13, and specifically tests in which you will not be expected to work out the calculated value. The calculated value will be given to you. So how did I come across these 4 particular categories? Well, they're part of a flow diagram that I have where we ask certain questions. So for example, we see that the first question is about nominal data. Now, in my list, I've put nominal data at the bottom, and I suppose it doesn't matter which is 1, which is 2, 3, and 4. I'm just choosing to do nominal data at the end because I think it is one that's a little bit more confusing than the others. But we see that there's only one type of test we can use, and that is chi-squared. So we look at the diagram and we ask the question, is it nominal data? Now, of course, this is not as easy as just looking at something, is it like male, female, guilty, not guilty? Because that could, well, indicate several things there. For example, male, female could just be independent groups. And therefore, we have to look at the nominal data, whether it's nominal data on both accounts. So for example, if you remember from drawing a contingency table, you could have something like guilty, not guilty, and the presence of an eyewitness versus the presence of not having an eyewitness. And that would be nominal data, because both of those are categories. Now, often that can be confusing. If you get a head around it, then that's great. And certainly if you can answer yes, then we go directly to this thing called chi-squared. Another word that you might want to look at is this word association. So when we have nominal data, we can't really do much with it other than look for an association between variables. So a variable of guilty and not guilty against having an eyewitness or not having an eyewitness. So that's one of my ideas, that if you can spot nominal data, you're going to move straight to chi-squared. I then choose to have a look at kind of what happens if you say, no, it's not nominal data. Well, instead of looking at the types of data so far, I recommend that you look at, is it a correlation? Go back to my table, we see that if it is a correlation, I have 2 particular tests, Spearman's and Pearson's. Okay. Now in my diagram, I just have Spearman's, but we could add Pearson's as well. And we will see later during the course as to kind of what is the difference between the two. And often when we look at a correlation, it's whether they've used the word relationship in describing the study. They could even use the word correlation in the hypothesis. So therefore look out for subtleties like that. Because once again, if the answer is it is a correlation, then we go straight to Spearman's or Pearson's row tests. Now, of course, it's often easy to think that there must be a relationship between two variables, but please think about it and only look out for that word relationship. So the way that my flow diagram works is pretty much gets your nominal data out of the way and then gets your correlation out of the way. Now, the truth of the matter may be is that it could be that we are able to answer no for both of those. Okay, so therefore we are left with two things left. We have your independent groups and repeated measures. So therefore, what we need to have a look at is the design of our study. And of course, if I can spot this, then I know that this is obviously important. Now, of course, we often talk about design and we talk about difference. So when we are testing for correlations or for nominal data with association, we're not testing a difference. We're comparing things. We're looking for an association. So what we find with independent groups, there's going to be a difference between scores. Sorry, independent groups, I made a mistake there, will be a difference between groups and a difference between scores. And of course, if I can spot that something is independent groups, then I need to find a way of remembering that it's Mann-Whitney. And if it's repeated measures, then I must remember there's Wilcoxon. Now, there's one exception to this, and that's the matched pairs. And I explained in a previous video how matched pairs is seen in the same light as repeated measures. So therefore, if I can understand my design, I can probably choose the correct test. For every single test, we're going to need at least some things. We might need the level of data. Now this is, for example, we've seen nominal, we've seen at least ordinal, and at least interval, and you'll see which one becomes relevant to which. I haven't mentioned the additional tests, but we pretty much will use the level of data to try and figure out what to do. We also need to find out whether we're testing for a difference or relationship. And then, of course, your research design. So sometimes the test is decided for us based just on the things that we know. So for example, if we know something's repeated measures, testing a difference between scores, and this is at least ordinal, we can go back to our diagram where it says a difference between scores, repeated measures, at least ordinal data, we know it's going to be the Wilcoxon. Now there's one more diagram that I want to show you, and this is just a complicated version of the one that I had that has every single option available to me. And my colleague, Mrs. Harries, has come up with some kind of an acronym in order to help you to decide what to do. Okay, so you have your Nick craves independent repeatedly, and can poor Sally use many red wellies for the actual test that we have. And we see actually ultimately the questions remain the same. Is it a nominal data? Yes. Chi-squared? No. Is it a correlation? Yes. Is it interval data? Yes. Pearson's. Is it at least ordinal? No. Spearman's. Okay, we see how each of these have levels of complexities. Now there's another video on YouTube looking at a table that looks a bit like this. Okay, and I've added the color there just to kind of make it a little bit more interesting. But how can I remember this table? Now I, for example, am happy with this type of flow diagram where I understand basically correlation, nominal data, and then I understand independent groups or repeated measures. And then from there, I can decide about the data, whether it's nominal or interval, and ordinal, at least ordinal or interval. But of course, some of you might find this particular table more interesting. And so how do we remember this? Well, we can perhaps use a couple of phrases. Now, of course, I'm trying to make a little bit of fun of this. So we can remember 4 phrases, hopefully. Lol, I'm really cool. No cars should crash. Only men wear socks. And injured unicorns roar painfully. Now, if I can remember those 4, I can fill in my table. Lol for level of measurement. I'm really cool. Independent measures, repeated measures, and correlation. No cars should crash. Nominal, chi-squared, sine test, chi-squared. Only men wear socks. Ordinal, Mann-Whitney, Wilcoxon, Spearman's. Interval is injured. Unicorns is unrelated. Raw, related T. And Pearson's painfully. Now, actually, whatever method you use is going to be fine with you. I'd probably recommend you come up with your own phrases. If you can, you're probably more likely to remember them. I'd also probably say spend some time with a blank table like this and see if you can actually fill it in, or see if you can draw the flow diagram. Spending time with this will actually be worth your while, because there's always going to be marks for correctly deciding the right type of inferential test. And of course, if you choose the wrong one, you lose all the marks. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed that. I know it's a bit silly, but of course, it is one way in which you can remember the different tests. I'd also recommend you only use this video once you've actually gone through all the tests. Okay, that's me, Psych.